Supreme Court recognized that the Constitution guarantees marriage equality. In doing so, they've reaffirmed that all Americans are entitled to the equal protection of the law, that all people should be treated equally, regardless of who they are or who they love. This decision will end the patchwork system we currently have. It will end the uncertainty hundreds of thousands of same-sex couples face from not knowing whether their marriage, legitimate in the eyes of one state, will remain if they decide to move or even visit another. This ruling will strengthen all of our communities by offering to all loving same-sex couples the dignity of marriage across this great land. In my second inaugural address, I said that if we are truly created equal, then surely the love we commit to one another must be equal as well. It is gratifying to see that principle enshrined into law by this decision. This ruling is a victory for Jim Obergefell and the other plaintiffs in the case. It's a victory for gay and lesbian couples who have fought so long for their basic civil rights. It's a victory for their children, whose families will now be recognized as equal to any other. It's a victory for the allies and friends and supporters who spent years, even decades, working and praying for change to come. And this ruling is a victory for America.
I think in the case of same-sex marriage, I do think that marriage, I'm informed by my faith about this, and I believe in traditional marriage. I think now we need to focus on two things. How do we create an environment where people aren't discriminated against, where we respect people's commitment to long-term loving relationships, and where we also allow people to act on their religious conscience. And a country as big and as diverse as this one ought to be able to sort that out, and that would be where I'm going to focus my energies.
Governor, you said yesterday, your spokesman said yesterday that you're not in support of a constitutional amendment.
Right.
There are other candidates who look like they want to take on that battle. Do you think that will be a divisive battle? Is that a good idea?
I don't think it's realistic. I don't think it's going to happen. And I think we ought to focus, just as I said, on trying to forge consensus so we can move forward. The courts have decided traditional marriage still is a hugely important element of a just, loving society, and we should respect people that have long-term loving relationships and allow people to act on their conscience, not just to say, as Mrs. Clinton has, look, if you have a religious view, you just got to keep it to yourself. That's not the way our First Amendment or our Bill of Rights works. It's the first freedom, and so when you act on your religious beliefs, you're acting on your conscience, and that should not be restricted either.
Why is it not a good idea to do the legislative right?
It's just not going to happen. I mean, I'm focused on solving problems. I'm running for president to fix a few really big, complex things. I'm not running to make a point, and I think this is the better approach.
The ruling on marriage equality capped off a historic week at the Supreme Court and a busy week for CBS News chief legal correspondent Jan Crawford. Jan, so this is a court, the Roberts Court, with 5 Republican appointees, but they don't always play by the conservative playbook.
Oh, no, they don't. And once again, I think conservatives are really feeling betrayed by this court. This year is just part of a long pattern where justices nominated by Republican presidents have ended up casting key votes for liberal rulings on some of the biggest issues of our time, whether it's abortion, affirmative action, and now we see Obamacare and gay rights. And that is something no one would have expected 10 years ago when, Democrats were terrified, Republicans were jubilant when President Bush put John Roberts and Samuel Alito on the court. Now, Alito, he's proven to be a solid judicial conservative, but Roberts has been harder to understand, as his votes in the Obamacare case show, where he twice now has joined forces with the liberal justices to save that law.
So do you think he's had a political change of heart? How would you explain this?
Well, conservatives see these decisions as a betrayal, that he is abandoning his judicial philosophy for political reasons. But Roberts, I think, would say, no, I'm not. I mean, I'm being consistent. He thinks that courts should not be playing a role in these big social debates and should instead defer to the legislature. That's what he says he did in Obamacare. Let Congress have the word. And that's how he explained his opposition to the ruling on same-sex marriage, that the legislature or the people should decide and not, unelected judges.
So he didn't agree that this was an equal protection issue under the 14th Amendment.
That's correct. And in that sense, he was with all four. He was among the four conservatives who all wrote dissent saying that the Constitution did just not guarantee this right. And conservative judicial philosophy tends to read the Constitution much more narrowly than the liberal philosophy does. And they're much more wanting to look to the words of the great document and what the founders wrote and what they meant and not try to read in new rights. So Roberts, in that sense, yesterday was very consistent with conservative judicial philosophy.
Welcome to A Spirited Debate. I'm Lauren Green. Check out these Bible verses you've probably heard before. Let the one who is without sin cast the first stone, or for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And how about this favorite? Judge not, lest ye be judged. If you don't go to church all that often, do you really get the full meaning of those verses, their context in your life? It's a question asked by ministers at a recent panel discussing whether preaching through the Bible actually has great risks. Joining me to explain is Pastor J.D. Greer of the Summit Church in North Carolina, who's also the author of Jesus Continued, and Bishop Harry Jackson, senior pastor at Hope Christian Church in D.C. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Lauren.
Well, Pastor J.D., let me start with you. So if you're a Christian minister, you have to draw from your major source material, which is the Bible. So what's the risk there?
Well, certainly the risk is the Bible offends every culture in every age, and so inevitably you're going to come to something that's very out of fashion with the culture that you live in. The Bible's kind of an equal opportunity offender, meaning that in all countries, in all places, at all times, it's always says something that was completely against the grain. So you're taking a risk of doing that, but I would say that the risks doing that are not as great as the risk of not preaching the Bible, because then you end up projecting just your thoughts and opinions and whatever your hobby horse is onto whoever is listening to you. So, yeah, the risks are there, but the risk of not doing it are even greater.
Yeah, Bishop, what about just the whole timing issue? You've got people who aren't in church very often. You've got a problem with trying to explain something that maybe they just don't have a foundation for.
Well, our real problem is, how do you convey a moral framework by which people can live, build a worldview, and operate in a society that is fluctuating and changing? So you've got to be systematic in some manner, but you've got to be entertaining at the same time. So we're living in a way where Hollywood can trump the average boring, dowdy sermon, and we've got to be contemporary, concise, but substance, as my fellow panelists has shared. I think that's really key, and people need truth to live by.
Yeah, but and Bishop, how do you make the Bible, though, based preaching relevant to people who don't attend church regularly, who are probably more influenced by MTV or, like you say, movies or whatever is hot on Facebook? How do you do that?
Well, I think you've got to start at the beginning in sermon preparation, asking yourself, over the next year, what needs to be said? What do my people need to know? Number two, what questions or dilemmas are they going to be asked? And then I think you start down the arduous task of trying to add music, drama, whatever to the equation. But today, one question may be, how would you address a culture that would be dealing with transgender identity issues without starting in the middle of the story and feeling like you're in a heavy-handed way declaring truth without background?
Yeah, and JD, I think that's the same question for you, because there's so many people who are sort of catechized by secular culture, and how do you make the Bible sort of relevant to their lives?
Well, you find that while a lot of things change from culture to culture, you find that the essence of humanity is the same. And so what people were thinking about 3,000 to 4,000 years ago is pretty much the same thing they're thinking about today. And so while it does require a little work to bridge some of the context, Abraham, for example, his context is a little different than ours, but the ultimate questions are still the same. I find that the closer that I stick to what God revealed, the more relevant I become. The church that I pastor is probably 9,000 or so on the weekend. 73% of the adults are single, and about that percentage are under the age of 30, between college age and the age of 30. And so I don't think, doing it that way, it loses its relevance. In fact, I think when you disconnect yourself from the timeless truth of God's Word and you immerse yourself in kind of just the contemporary opinions of the day, that's when you become irrelevant.
How much, though, is Bible literacy a problem, though? Because I was reading even some seminaries say there's a lack of Bible knowledge even among their students entering. J.D.?
Oh my goodness, yes. I mean, even in the 10 years that I've been a pastor, the amount that people just bring into knowing, when you're talking through things, you're having to explain, what concepts are. And you're having to say, people maybe 20 years ago would have known what this is, but here's what this means. It's a challenge, but it's really one that everybody in every culture faces just in different ways. And that's kind of our job, is to bridge that context and educate people.
Bishop, let me give you the last word on that, because, when I grew up, I learned every sort of Bible story out there, and a lot of people just don't have that context. What do you say?
Well, we live in an age where people want to hear stories. Storytelling is in. Dramatic examples and declarations are in. So I think people are hungry to know. I think our challenge is to make what we say relevant. I agree with my friend here that it's very important that we stay close to the text because the truths are timeless. But there's an amazing openness and hunger, I believe, for truth in America. Folks are just tired of judgmentalism, and they're tired of old-fashioned presentations. That's my take on things.
All right, I want to thank you so much.
Obviously, another brick in the foundation of the wall of equality. But it doesn't stop here. Many co-authors on the bill. And we have many more